Hi there, welcome to lesson 5.3a, slope-intercept form. Our goal is to be able to write a linear equation in slope-intercept form. So that means write it as y equals mx plus b. There are three forms to a linear equation. Our goal in algebra is to be able to take any of those three forms and convert it into other forms. Our focus today is going to be on taking equations that are written in standard form or point slope form and converting them into an equivalent equation written in slope intercept form, y equals mx plus b. So that is our goal today. I'm going to take you through 7 examples. The first one looks just like this. You can go ahead and copy down that problem. And let's begin to work it through. Okay, so here we've got the equation 2x minus 3y equals -6. This equation right now is written in standard form, and the goal here is to write it into slope-intercept y equals mx plus b. So what I want to do is solve this equation for y equals, just like you see slope-intercept form. So I'm going to draw a line right down the equal sign. I'm going to put a box around the y to highlight the y, that is what I want to get by itself. So my goal here is for the equation to say y equals. Now I see that it's stuck to the -3, so that's like closest friends. I'm going to leave that there. I want to get rid of the 2x. To make a 2x into a 0, I'd want to subtract it. So 2x minus 2x will give you 0. Be sure you do it on the other side as well. Then I'm going to drop down the -3y. Now over here on the other side, remember the goal is to get this to read y equals mx plus b. We want the term with the x first because that's going to be our slope. So I'm going to want to write minus 2x first and then the -6 after that. Okay, now my next step here is to get, of course, the y by itself. Do you see how it's being multiplied to the -3? So to undo that, I'd want to divide by -3. Okay, that's going to get me y all by itself right down here. But if I do it to one side, I need to do it to the other side. So if I divide the left side by -3, I have to divide the right side by -3 also. I want to caution you not to do this. Don't divide the entire thing by -3 like this, because what happens is it's really hard to see that you have to divide the slope and the y-intercept by -3. So instead of doing that, my advice to you would be to divide everything on this side by -3, but do it separately. So divide the slope part by -3 and the y-intercept by -3. This way, the slope is going to really pop out to you. -2 divided by -3 is positive, and then this would just be positive 2/3. I'd leave it as a proper fraction, and then the x. Then, of course, -6 divided by -3 is just positive 2, and now I have it written in slope-intercept form. So the other day we learned that the slope right here is 2/3, and the y-intercept is right here at positive 2. And this is going to really help us with graphing in our next lesson. So here's our equation. The other thing to keep in mind here, being that the 2/3 is the slope, the 2/3 is slope, not the x. So we don't want to put an x here, just the number in front. Remember, the x and the y represent ordered pairs that are along that line. Okay, the slope is just 2/3, the y-intercept is just positive 2. All right, let's take a look at example number 2. This one is also written in standard form. Copy it down in your notes. All right, we're going to put a line straight down the equal sign just to organize our work as we're solving the equation. Remember, we want to solve this equation to get it to say y equals. Okay, so right here, I'm going to put a box around the y. Now, the y has a coefficient in front of it. It just doesn't, you can't see it. It's invisible. It's a 1, -1. So just keep that in mind. All right, let's get the y by itself. Let's take away 4x to both sides. So 4x minus 4x, that just cancels and makes that a 0. So I'm going to bring down -y. Now here, I want to be sure I put these two terms in the correct order. So I want the -4x first, and then the positive 8 after that. Okay, because the term with the x needs to come first, just like it does up here in this equation. All right, so my last step here is to undo, remember we want to get the y by itself, to undo this -1 that's being multiplied by it. So to do that, I would just divide by -1, but then over here I have to divide everything over here by -1, the slope and the intercept. So I get y equals, now my slope is really going to pop out at me. -4 divided by -1 is just 4, then the x. And here the intercept, when I divide here, I would get -8. And then this would be my equation. And again, the slope is this number right here, 4, and the y-intercept is -8. So it's going to cross the y-axis way down at -8 when I graph it. And again, this is going to be used for graphing in the next lesson. Okay, one more like this in standard form. This time the x has an invisible coefficient of 1. So let's draw a line down to get the y by itself. If you want to pause the video and give this a try on your own, you can. Just like we did before, we want to subtract the x, both sides, get rid of it, make it 0. So bring down 5y, then over here, be sure these two are in the correct order. I want the -x first, and then the -15. Now, keeping in mind here, this -x, there's a number in front of there. It's the invisible 1, -1, okay? My last step then, to get the y by itself, would be to divide by 5. And I get y equals, but then over here I have to divide everything by 5. So I'm going to divide the slope and the y-intercept separately so it's easier to see what both of them are. So now I can easily see that this is a slope of -1/5, write the x after it, and the intercept, if I take -15 divided by 5, is just -3. And there I have my equation in slope-intercept form. Slope is -1/5, intercept is -3. I'm just pulling them straight from there with what we learned the other day. There's your slope, there's your intercept. Okay, that's number 3. Now on number 4, we're going to see an equation that looks a little bit different than the last examples. This equation happens to be in a different form. It's called point slope form. So again, our goal here, as you're writing it down, is to get it to look like this. We want the same equation, just in a different form. Kind of like 0.75 and 3/4 are the same number, they're just different forms of the same number. Okay, draw a line down the equal sign, put a box around the y. Now, in your mind, you might be thinking, oh, I want to add the 7. I want to do that real quick. Get rid of that 7. Not yet. Look over here. Do you see how we have distributive property? There's parentheses. There should be no parentheses in our final answer here when we convert to this form. So we want to get rid of these parentheses. Also, think about PEMDAS. Okay, if we're simplifying this here, we don't want to add or subtract until we've multiplied. Multiplication is going to come first. So I want to do the multiplication here in the distributive property before I do anything else. All right, so let's distribute. So we have -1/2 times x. And then I've got the -1/2 times +2. Signs disagree. Half times 2, or half of 2, is 1. Okay, box around that y again. All right, I'm ready for the next step. Now we can go ahead and add the 7. So I'm adding 7 to both sides, once on both sides. Okay, now this is going to become 0, and I get y by itself. But over here on this side, I've got two terms, -1/2 x and a -1. Which one of them can I actually add the 7 to? Yeah, this one. Because this doesn't have an x, they're not like terms. So I'm going to bring down the -1/2 x, and then -1 plus 7 is just +6, and I have my equation in slope-intercept form. So what's the slope? -1/2. The intercept? +6. Okay? Now I want to show you something. I had mentioned that this was point slope form. What you're going to find out later is that being that this is point slope form, this number right here is the slope. Do you notice how it's still the slope when I convert it? Yeah, these two are the exact same equation. They're just written in a different form, but they're both equivalent. That slope shouldn't actually change at all because they're the same thing. Okay, ready for 5. This one's also written in point slope form. So being that you kind of know that, even though you're not really expected to know what point slope form is yet, but that means this is the slope, this number right here, 1/3. So when I convert this into slope intercept form, that 1/3 slope isn't going to change. All right, line down the middle. All right, let's begin by putting a box around the y. We want this to say y equals. Y is already on the left. That's good, but let's distribute. 1/3 times x. 1/3 times -9, 1/3 of -9 would be -3. So I'm just going to copy everything else down here. Remember, the goal is to get the y. So now I can go ahead and undo the +5, minusing 5 to both sides of the equation. Over here, I can only minus the 5 to the negative 3 because they're like terms. So I got 1/3 x, and then this is going to become negative 8. And there's my equation in slope-intercept form. Of course, the slope is 1/3, and the intercept is negative 8. Now, notice how we had mentioned that this was the slope, right? You're going to find out later that that's the point and that's the slope, but you notice how the slope is exactly the same, right? Because these two are equivalent. We're just merely converting the form, okay? All right, now 6. See if you can try this one. Again, this one is in point slope form. So copy it down, work it out. Maybe you want to pause the video and give it a try. When it comes to this 3/4, when you're distributing, you may decide to use a calculator, use your head, or maybe you write it out. 3/4 of negative 12. So again, if you're not sure what 3/4 times 12 is, you can write it out. You could also use a calculator, right? 3/4 of negative 12 is negative 9. Just copying everything down, boxing up that y. Now I'm ready to go ahead and add the 4 to both sides. And I get y equals 3/4 x. This is what I'm adding the 4 to. That's the only number I can actually add it to, and that's going to give me negative 5. There's my equation in slope-intercept form. Slope is 3/4, intercept is negative 5. I'm having you practice pulling that out because you're going to use it to graph. Okay, so I've taken this equation, just converted it into a different form, still both equivalent. Now, hold on for number 7. I'm pulling back standard form because often at the end of the lesson, kids forget how to do this already, okay, even though we just did it in number 1, 2, and 3. Also, we're going to get kind of a funky answer. So copy it down. This is in standard form again. This one's a little bit trickier to convert. All right, we want it y equals mx plus b. Okay, if you need to highlight the y to remind yourself that's what you're solving for. Do you remember what the first step is? Hopefully you recall we want to minus the 2x from both sides. That's going to make that 0, bring down the negative 10y. Then remember these two have to be in a certain order. The term with the x comes first because that's the slope is connected to the x. And then the plus 12 just drops down right next to it. Now my next step here to get the y by itself is to divide by negative 10 because remember it's being multiplied. So when I do that, I want to divide everything over here by negative 10. I would suggest doing it separately, the slope and the intercept separately. Okay, now let's take a look at the slope. It's going to pop out at you hopefully now. Negative 2 divided by negative 10. We know that's positive. 2/10, which simplifies to 1/5. Don't forget to copy the x. Now this is our y-intercept. Positive divided by a negative is a negative. 12/10. You can simplify that by dividing by 2, giving us 6/5. And there's the equation in slope-intercept form. The slope is a fraction, which we're used to. The intercept is also a fraction, which we're not so used to. It's negative 6/5 or negative 1 1/5. Of course, you guys are going to learn that you wouldn't want to ever graph it like this because you can't really graph an intercept that's not a whole number. So that's why we have different forms of equations. We'd want to keep it in standard and graph it from that. Okay. But yeah, this is what it would end up being. And not always are you going to get a nice, pretty intercept. That doesn't always happen. Okay. I'm going to pull back to just refresh us on our goal. Remember, our goal here was to be able to write a linear equation in slope-intercept form. Want to take an equation and convert it to look like y equals mx plus b. Hopefully you felt like this lesson video helped you with that. Thank you for joining me. Have a great day.